Welcome to the Peep Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Maroc. It's only episode 3, and I already have a two-parter for you. In an effort to stick to my goal of presenting how psi is researched and relating it to people experiencing everyday paranormal, I ended up with a couple hours worth of stories that are just too interesting to cut out. So on this episode, we'll talk to John Kruth about how he studied the way emotions can affect technology. And in the following episode, we'll talk to Terry, a woman who's had related experiences, and then some, since she was a child. One of the topics that will come up in John's interview is the idea of a PK poltergeist. Now, the dictionary defines a poltergeist as a ghost or other supernatural being, supposedly responsible for physical disturbances, such as loud noises and objects thrown around. If you watch paranormal shows or horror movies, you've probably heard that the word poltergeist is German for noisy ghost. But if you run in serious research circles, you know there's an alternative definition that says poltergeist activity may actually be caused by a living person's unconscious use of psychokinesis to manifest those physical disturbances. John is going to explain how he leveraged his background in information technology to design a scientific study about whether our emotions can affect technology. And then he'll share a story of a field investigation of poltergeist activity that had a family at their wits' end. If you've listened to episode 1, you're familiar with John Kruth. For those who haven't listened to that episode yet, allow me to introduce him. John is the executive director of the Rhine Research Center and founder and education director of the Rhine Education Center. His 20-plus years of professional technology experience and 10-plus years as a professional researcher provide a unique insight into the integration of technology and parapsychological research. His research includes explorations into subtle energies of the body, including psychic healing, the energy behind psychokinesis, poltergeist activity, and other unconscious effects on electronic devices, and measurements of biophotons, ultraviolet light from energy healers. He has numerous publications and has spoken at professional conferences and other forums regarding scientific parapsychology, the history of the Rhine, the nature of energy healing, poltergeist, and other topics related to parapsychology and the paranormal. Besides his research, John's current projects include the development of a community of psi experiencers at the Rhine and worldwide through the use of technology to provide online courses, broadcasts of parapsychological speakers and events, and the development of online resources for scientists and those who are looking for reliable and professional information about scientific parapsychology. Here's my interview with John. All right, we are really grateful to have John Kruth, the Executive Director of the Rhine Research Center, back with us today. We are talking about his particular study. It's called The Effects of Mood and Emotion on a Real-World Working Computer System and Network Environment, which is a mouthful. It's a very interesting article that was published in the Journal of Parapsychology. And I will, rather than draw out this introduction anymore, say, hi, John. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Nikki. It's great to be back again.
So what inspired you to do this particular research study?
Well, this study was something that I've been thinking about for a lot of years, actually. Before I even became a parapsychologist, I worked in computers and was in a software development environment for over almost 20 years. And when working in that environment, I think pretty much anybody you talk to who works in a software environment will tell you that there seems to be certain people when they walk into a room that all the computers seem to stop working. It seems like things just break around them quite often. But besides that, there also seem to be some people when they walk in and things all seem to work really well. Usually, the people who break things, they end up being testers in the software environment, and the people who fix things, who that make them work, they usually end up being the developers. Well, this is kind of we had numerous times where I would be working on a project and someone would call me and saying, "This isn't working, this isn't working." I'd go down and I'd walk in the room and it would start working. And the question is that real? What's really happening here? Is it really that there's some people that break things and some people fix things? And so, it just doesn't seem right. But it's so consistent. It's like a folklore story that we hear. And in science, this is where all of our work begins with observations. We start to hear stories, and something gets our interest, and then we take it to the next step and say, well, is there any way to test it? Well, when I came to the Rhine and I started to work in research I and started to learn more about exactly how to construct research studies, this was a tough one to tackle. But what I decided was it seems like there's some sort of emotional component to it. I'm going to take a sidetrack here for a sec
Okay.
because uh, back about 2014, about 6 years ago, I got a phone call at the Rhine from a medical doctor who was calling because one of his patients was a young boy and he was having problems with electronics. Anytime that he had electronics, like a phone or a computer or any objects that were near him, they would start to break or behave very strangely. And so he was saying, "Can you help with this?" Because he said his parents, this boy's mom and his grandmother, brought him to the doctor and said, "There's something wrong with him. Can you fix him?" And the doctor's like, "Well, he gave him all the medical tests he could and checked him out, and the boy's completely healthy. There's nothing wrong. So I don't know what to say about this." Luckily, the doctor knew about the Rhine. And when he called the Rhine, he said, "You guys know a little bit about these sorts of effects, people who might affect electronics. Is it possible you might be able to look into this?" Well, whenever I heard about this, my first thought was that possibly this family was trying to get attention.
Hmm.
Maybe they wanted to be on TV, because they saw some of these ghost hunter shows or something like this. And maybe there was something weird going on that I wasn't sure what their motivation was. So I made an appointment to meet with them. And I met with them at the doctor's office because I knew the doctor was a safe space for them. And when I met with them, within just the first 5 minutes, it became very apparent these people were very sincere. This little boy was just a quiet young boy who was just trying to do his best at school and go through life. And he seemed to have all types of trouble with electronics. It got to the point that his grandmother wouldn't let him come near her computer because he had broke. Well, the way they described it, he broke the other one when he came in the room. There was a washing machine they had that was electronic, and when he walked downstairs near the washing machine, it broke the washing machine. The washing machine stopped working. It was brand new. So
Wow.
now they unplug the washing machine anytime that it's not being used so he doesn't break it again. These are the stories they're telling me. They're telling me stories about how the telephone in their house would just continuously ring whenever he walked by it. And so they ended up taking a big metal pot and putting it over top of their telephone in their house, which is which is a really strange thing to do, but it stopped the telephone from ringing. They had the phone man come over, they had electricians come over, they had plumbers come over, all types of people to try to see if they could figure out what was happening and how come this was happening. They couldn't figure it out. But one of the biggest things, this little boy, he could not have a cell phone. He's an 11-year-old boy. He couldn't have a cell phone. This was kind
Mm.
of the big thing for him. And because anytime he had a phone, it would just dial numbers continuously and send text to the point that one month, his mom got the bill from the phone company, and there were thousands and thousands of texts sent from this one phone that he had. and the texts had been sent so quickly, there's no way he could have manually sent them. And he called up the phone company and they told him, this is obviously a mistake. And they said, no, it's true. That's in the records. We have these texts coming from the phone going to these people continuously. And she said, but it's impossible. He couldn't have done it. So they eliminated the text from the phone bill. But it was clear that there was some sort of problems that were going on. And the big thing was, he said, I'm really afraid, and these were his words, he said, I'm really afraid my electromagnetic field is going to hurt my mom or my grandma.
Aw.
So, it was very clear he was sincere at that point. So I made arrangements with another researcher to go with him and to go to their house, because that's where most of the events were taking place. And we went to their house and we sat down with them and just had a nice conversation, sat in their living room. It was just a normal house in the country out in rural North Carolina. And as I was in there, I noticed on their kitchen counter, there's a big pot turned upside down on the counter. And I said, what's under there? And they said, well, that's the phone that whenever it's not covered, it makes noise. And I said, can we uncover it? And they were telling me stories about the cell phones and how anytime he was on the cell phone, that it would make all kind of noise and they couldn't speak on the cell phone. And I said, well, which phones would he make a phone call from? And they say, oh, he would make a phone call from this wireless phone here. And I said, which cell phone would he call? And his mom said, well, it would be my cell phone. Well, I'm a scientist. I said, can we do that?
Right.
So we did. And we had him make a phone call from the wireless to her cell phone. And, he walked in the other room and, she picked up the phone and said, hello. And then within 5 seconds, she said, up there it goes. Very casually, very nonchalant. There it goes. And I was like, where there what goes? And she goes, well, I can't hear anything. I just hear static. And I said, do you mind if I take the phone? And I took it and I was hearing static. So I handed it off to my other research friend, Bill. And I said, Bill, would you listen to the phone and just tell me what you hear? And I went in the other room where he was making the call and he was holding the wireless phone in his hand and he was really upset. And he was going, hello, hello, and screaming into the phone. And and Bill from the other room couldn't hear him, just heard static. I said, calm down a minute. I said, relax. Do you mind if I take the phone from you a second? He said, no, here, take the phone. I took the phone from him. I put it up to my ear and I said, hello, Bill? And Bill goes, hi, John. And I said, you can hear me? He said, yeah, I hear you fine. I said, hang on a minute. I gave it back to the little boy. And all I hear from the other room is, all I hear is that static again. So there
Wow.
was something about this little boy that was having an effect on these electronics. Well, I was prepared for this because I had spoken to some other people who've had similar sort of effects in the past and talked to them about how we might be able to help them in this situation. Their goal was to eliminate this. He had the remote control on the television set would make the channels just change constantly. And eventually the remote control broke. As I mentioned, the washing machine, the computer system, the cell phones, it had gotten so bad, it was getting expensive for them. And they just wanted
Yeah.
it to stop.
This poor
And so,
family.
yes, it was very disturbing for them. And so I talked to them and I said, look, let's see if we can try a couple things. After we had observed the phenomena and realized that it was a real phenomenon that was occurring, and it wasn't anything that was being done purposely, I taught them some really simple relaxation techniques and visualization techniques. And I asked them, have you ever done any breathing exercises before? And this family had never done anything. So I had them sit down together and led them through a guided meditation, taught them to use their breathing to focus and relax. And it seemed to be very, very, very appealing to them. Well, I told this little boy, I said, okay, so I want you to next time that this event happens, something like this happens, like he was walking through the house and the smoke alarm started going off when he went by. And the family's just ignoring it. And they're like, this happens all the time. and to me, I'm sitting there and going, this happens all the time. What, So anyway, I said, next time that something like this happens, I want you to stop and think about what was I just thinking about? And I said, then think about what were you thinking about just a moment ago? My goal was to try to get him to use mindfulness to find the triggers that were causing these effects to occur. And I said, when you start to notice these things happening and you start to find you're thinking about things that might cause it, use your breathing exercises and relax. So we were there for a number of hours that day. I mean, to the point that we were there through through midday and through mealtime and things. We ended up, leaving, and within less than a week, within like 3 or 4 days, I got a call from his grandmother saying, "Stop. All of these things that have been going on for the past years have stopped." So something about he really, really liked the relaxation and the breathing exercises. And he got to the point that he was really excited that he could control this and stop it from happening and be able to relax whatever he felt it coming on. So it's been now for a number of years. I haven't spoken to them in a couple of years now, but he he started to be able to have normal relationships with the electronics and be able to go to school and use the computers at school without having problems with them. And it's because of this fact that he was able to relax around the instrument. So, how does this lead to the experiment that we were talking about, right?
Right.
Well, when we talk about what I noticed is that it seemed like anxiety or stress seemed to bring on these effects in this little boy, and that relaxation would make it go away. Well, when I was trying to figure out how can I create an experiment, and how can I evoke this reaction, my first thought is if I can make people relax, it'd be really easy to see if they have fewer effects. But it's easier to make people stressed than it is to make them relaxed.
Right.
So I designed an experiment to help to evoke a sense of anxiety and a sense of stress in people. And I did it using computer systems. I was a software developer, so I created some computer games, just some little games where you're trying to move the ball from one box to another, find the card, or type some letters into a box, that type, match the text that's on the screen. And I did all of these things and set a time limit on them. And if people were able to finish in a certain period of time, they'd get reward. If they didn't, then, well, I still gave them the reward, but I didn't tell them that. So the idea was to produce anxiety in them, to get them anxious about trying to finish, to get this nice piece of chocolate that I had set aside for them whenever they were finished. So evoking anxiety was the goal of that part of the experiment. At the same time, in the same room, without them knowing about it, I had a computer network set up. And that computer network was sending messages constantly, 24 hours a day, sending over 7,000 messages a second between the computers. And I let it run on and on. And most computer networks, if you set them up, they will automatically correct errors between the network and resend again so that you don't get interruptions in the signal. This is the way the internet works. This is the way your cable TV works. It's all about catching the errors. Well, I set up my network so that I would catch the errors myself and count them. And I didn't correct them. I was just trying to find out which errors were occurring and how many there were. The question was, when people become anxious, will I see more errors on the system than when they're not anxious? And that's what I found. I found that when people reported more anxiety when they were doing the experiment, I saw more errors on the computer system than when people were not anxious. So this confirmed the idea that just your emotions and your mood can have effects on electronics, even if you don't know that there's a network being monitored in a room or there's computers being monitored in a room. So why is this important? Well, you have these people working in computer labs, you have them trying to do different work, and all of a sudden they can't get anything done because the computers just stop working for them. They seem to not work. Or maybe, you're carrying your phone around with you and all of a sudden, your phone starts acting up. What is it? Could it possibly be that you're having an effect on the actual electronics? Not that you're making some sort of mistake with your computer, but that you're actually affecting the computer. And this is what we found. And so what's the best way to deal with this? Do some breathing exercises. Maybe take a walk. Maybe go get a cup of coffee. Just get away from the system for a while. Let yourself calm down. calm your emotions, reduce your anxiety, and then come back again because it's more likely that the system will work better after that.
Yeah, that's very good advice. I actually participated in that study, and I'm pretty sure I was in the group that was expected to have high anxiety. But at the time, I was working somewhere where I had computer issues on a regular basis. Software wouldn't work, the internet wouldn't connect. And I had just kind of learned to not let it stress me out. So when I was having difficulty with the software and trying to get it done in the amount of time, because I really wanted that chocolate bar, I just kind of I did those things. I just took a deep breath and thought, okay, well, there's it's just a chocolate bar. It's fine. I'll be okay if I don't finish on time. So I didn't really let it stress me out too much. So I self-reported that I didn't really have any anxiety because that was the truth. That was just like a situation I had gotten used to. Um, so if you were to do this particular experiment again, would you want to weed somebody like me out? Like, did I skew the data in any way?
No, I definitely wouldn't want to keep you out. One of what you just described is really, it's very insightful, and it's that people who work with computers a lot, people who deal with these sorts of things, they learn to find mechanisms to control it and how to work with them so that when they do start to get anxious, they control their emotions so that they don't affect the electronics. They're able to manage this. And so what I'm actually trying to do a replication of this study. I mean, the study was very high powered. We had, 135 people come through and do the study. But what I'm trying to do now is actually monitor physiology because, there were people like you who, whenever they came in and I would expect them to be anxious, they ended up not being anxious at all. But there were other people who came in and I wasn't expecting them to be anxious because they were pretty simple computer games that we had on there and they wouldn't be, they'd be able to do it very easily. But just being near a computer made them nervous. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
and so breaking up these groups, I had to break them up in a different way than I had originally planned. I had two groups that were equal in size initially, but when I recorded who reported the highest anxiety, the groups were different. It didn't come out to be equal, and I ended up with unequal sized groups. So I realized that I can't really determine who's going to be anxious and who's not going to be anxious before the study starts. So measuring their physiology, like measuring their heart rate, measuring vasoconstriction, skin electrodermal skin response, measuring these sorts of things will give us a sense of their emotions and of their physiology when it's occurring and looking for correlations between what we would consider indications of stress in the body
Hmm.
and errors on the computer system. By looking for correlations between them, we can get a much better read on what we're seeing here and what type of human physiology might determine that might be an effect on electronic systems. And with as I was mentioning, with us everybody's carrying cell phones now. Back in the 1960s and 70s, when they would notice people having effects on objects around them, they called them poltergeist effects, where people would have, it wasn't a ghost, but it would actually be an individual who would be having unconscious effects on objects that would move around them in their house, maybe, things that would fly across the room. But now, with the predominance of electronics in our life, it's much more likely to be expressed in electronics than it was before. So learning how to control that is all the more important now.
That's a really good point. That is, yeah, that's a really good point. I've had in doing investigations, I have had some experience where I've walked into houses that there was a different kind of energy going on, and I at the time did not recognize it for what it was, but the reason they had asked me to come investigate was because things were moving on their own. They had watched things move on their own in their own house, and they were pretty freaked out. And they were just kind of looking for some sort of validation and maybe some advice on what to do. And, you know, hindsight being 2020, especially after hearing the story of the little boy, I feel like I could do a much better job of advising them than I did at the time. They still ended up okay, but I I feel like I would be well, I am much more informed after this conversation, so I totally appreciate that.
That's completely why the Rhine exists, you know. And I think last time I was here, I was talking about the Rhine Education Center, which
Yes.
is where we teach courses in parapsychology. One of the courses we teach is on field investigations, which many people call paranormal investigations. But
Mhm.
within parapsychology, we call them field investigations, where you go to someone's house, or you might go to some place where it's considered to be a haunted location, or where there might be a poltergeist activity occurring. And one of the first things that we tell people is, make sure that when you're going in, you have the client in mind. And you always want to make sure that the client, the person you're going there for, is the one who's going to benefit from the situation. There's too many times that people will go into one of these situations and say, "Oh yeah, it looks like you have ghost activity. It looks like you have something going on in this room up here. Thank you very much. Goodbye." And it's like you didn't help them at that point. They invited you because they were trying to find out what was a way to relieve them of the anxiety and stress that they were having. And so that's one of the things we try to encourage people to do in our courses in the Rhine Education Center.
Yeah, I think that's very useful, and I have met many investigators who could definitely benefit from some formal courses because believe it or not, a lot of them are out there for their own curiosity and they are not looking to help the people who are asking them to come to their homes. And that goes against pretty much everything I stand for. If I if I go to a house and there does appear to be something going on, if I don't think that I am equipped to handle it, I will reach out to find somebody who can help them out because I'm not, there's always going to be that curiosity, but the the whole idea of being in it for what basically amounts to selfish reasons is just wrong to me. So I I have in the past I've reached out to you a couple of times to ask for advice on investigations and
Hmm.
talking with people who had some issues that I wasn't quite sure how to get a handle on. So I definitely appreciate having the Rhine as a resource. 100%. And I would encourage anybody who's interested in taking investigations seriously and trying to help people to check out the those online courses.
Yeah, that's part of the ethics of research. A big thing when we're teaching research, and a big part of any research type of study where you're involving people, is to make sure you're treating them fairly and you're taking them into account. And so by knowing the limitations of your own abilities and your own knowledge, and letting other people come into the investigation or come into the study to provide their expert knowledge. That's one of the most important parts of ethics, is knowing your own limitations, not trying to do things that you're not qualified to do. And it sounds like you were doing that, so it's really that's to your credit that you were taking ethics into account.
Yeah, I do believe that well, that's just how I'm wired and obviously that's how you're wired and I wish more people were wired that way. But I'll get off the soapbox. I didn't mean to get on there. And I will thank you again for coming to join us for another episode and I am sure I will be in touch again. One more time, if anybody is interested in supporting the Rhine or taking the courses, can you tell them how to get in touch?
Sure. The best way to get in touch with us is at our website at www.rhine.org. And that has all the information about the research we're doing, has information about all the online activities that we have from meetings to online events where we have speakers come in. It has links to the Rhine Education Center where we have an online school for parapsychology. And it also has places where you can join as a member. And just for $10 a month, you can become a sustaining member and really help us to make plans and to keep our work with our research and with our community development going on. So please come to the Rhine and help us to continue. We are a nonprofit organization. Thanks, Nikki. It was great to talk to you today.
It was great to talk to you too. Thanks again to John for joining me to talk about this fascinating subject. If you want more information on the research being conducted at the Rhine, visit www.rhine.org. For the record, Rhine is spelled Rhine. Episode 4 will publish on November 25th. In it, we'll continue this conversation about how our emotions can affect technology. I'll introduce you to an old friend of mine who has had a lifetime of related stories, as well as other paranormal experiences. Everything from ghosts to UFOs that were just too good to leave out. Some of them I didn't even know about until we did the interview. Once again, thanks to you for listening. If you like the podcast, please give it some rating love on your favorite podcast app. Share it with friends and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can keep up with the show on the Facebook page, facebook.com/peeppodcast. Don't forget the periods and peep. If you have an idea for a show topic, remember it needs to be able to be studied scientifically. You can fill out the contact form at peeppodcast.com. That's PEEP podcast.com. Remember, that stands for People Experiencing Everyday Paranormal. If I can find a study about it, I'll be happy to use it. Thanks again for listening. Stay safe and be well.